law. You could stop there. It's violating international law every day in countless ways. It's violating the 1948 Genocide Convention. It is violating many Geneva Conventions on war, and this attack on a diplomatic mission, but also not just an attack on a diplomatic mission, a political assassination, is another direct violation of international law. Israel is a rogue state. This is the basic point. It believes that because the U.S. is its benefactor, it can do what it wants, that it can act with impunity. One suspects that Israel made this attack to widen the war. I believe Israel would like to pull the United States into a wider Middle East war, especially a war in which the U.S. would join against Iran, a war that would be devastating for Israel and for the Middle East and for the world. But I think that that is the intention of the Israeli government. And it's a very shocking point, but Israel goes out of its way to provoke. Maybe it also is a way for Israel to make sure that there's no diplomatic off-ramp to this crisis, because most of the world, including myself, believes that the way to end this crisis is not through war, but through the creation of a state of Palestine as a member state of the United Nations. And that, I believe, can and should be accomplished immediately through diplomacy at the United Nations, in the UN Security Council and in the UN General Assembly. And one feels that Israel makes moves like the one in attacking the Iranians to prevent diplomacy from taking place as well, because it's obviously the goal of this government to prevent any kind of diplomatic solution to this crisis. Israel wants to solve this through purely military means, ethnic cleansing, disposing of the Palestinians. And so anything which could move towards a diplomatic end, to say, you know, even with Iran, there could be a peace, they want to prove the opposite. So in short, yes, this is a war crime. It's acting with impunity. And it's all based on the notion, so far not disconfirmed, that Netanyahu can do anything, and Biden will follow meekly along.
Can the it's a little bit of an aside here, but you tweaked my curiosity. Can the United Nations, the General Assembly, and the Security Council, or maybe I don't have this right, admit the Palestinians as a Palestinian state with full rights as a state over Israel's objection?
Of course it could. It would be a vote of the Security Council.
So the U.S. would veto it.
The U.S. could veto it. It shouldn't veto it. But
right.
The fact is, if you ask, could the UN admit the state of Palestine, the answer is yes. There is a state of Palestine, by the way. Everybody should remember that 140 countries recognize Palestine as a state. But Palestine is not a UN member state. There are 193 UN member states. Back in 2011, Palestine applied for UN membership. When you apply for UN membership, you submit an application to essentially the UN Security Council, and then the UN Security Council, sitting as an admissions committee, reviews the application to see whether the applicant qualifies as a potential UN member state. Well, that process actually took place a dozen years ago. And the conclusion was that Palestine is a valid applicant to the UN as a member state. But the United States, in its normal cynical way, told the Palestinians, don't push right now. Don't push. It's Israel's a little bit against it. So don't push, accept observer status for the moment, and then we'll move this application right along. The United States has never been an honest broker, obviously, in the Israel-Palestine affairs. That goes back now basically to 1948 and onward. And so the Palestinians were pushed to accept observer status, which is not member state status.
Right.
But the legal application was not dismissed. It's sitting there. My own view is it should be accepted immediately. Now, again, the United States could well veto it, contrary to, again, what President Mumbles says all the time. Biden will mumble, oh, we believe in a two-state solution, and then will do what Netanyahu says.
Oh, Professor Sachs, let me stop you for a second. Here's Tony Blinken 2 days ago in Paris on the very same subject, mumbling, hand-wringing, but saying the very same thing 2 days ago.
We also agree that we have to find a path to a durable, lasting peace for Palestinians and Israelis alike. And we both agree that ultimately that has to include the establishment of a Palestinian state with necessary security guarantees for Israel.
Okay, it was 1 day ago. It was yesterday. The United States will be eating its own words if it vetoed that.
Don't you just want to cry every time you listen to Blinken?
Yes,
he's so sad, and it is something. If only someday he could become Secretary of State of the United States, it would really be amazing. But he just looks at it, and he's an academic, and so he wrings his hands. But someday, Tony, you could be Secretary of State. It would be amazing. You could be Secretary of State of a sovereign country that could actually take decisions just like you say you want. And maybe there'd even be a president that someday could do something. But it's so sad for Biden. He just longs to be president. But we know what he wants because he tells us all the time. He wants a two-state solution. He wants to end the war in Gaza. He wants to stop the attack in Rafah. And someday, Joe, you could be president of the United States, not President Netanyahu. It would be amazing.
2 or 3 days ago, the Israelis, over a course of several hours and several miles, pursued, followed, hunted down, and murdered 7 international food workers, one of whom was an American. Now, there's no justification for this. There's no justification for what Israel is doing in Gaza at all when it kills innocent civilians. What do you expect will be the repercussions to this? Nothing? Or is this the straw that will break the camel's back?
Well, there's no straw that will break the camel's back. But it's, of course, this is another crime and just another notch in an ongoing disaster. But I think what's interesting about it, actually, aside from the tragic event itself, is 7 people died, and it's received more attention, I would say, than probably the last 10,000 Palestinians.
Yes.
The president of Israel came out and made an apology for 7 people dying. He didn't make an apology for 33,000 Palestinians dying because he's been party to their deliberate murder. Palestinians in the Israeli eyes are not human beings, it seems. These 7 have generated an apology by the president of Israel. Now, partly this is profoundly cynical PR because there's a famous chef who is a part of this humanitarian effort, and so it gets more news and attention. But I find the reaction not in the slightest way, how should I put it, gratifying that Israel has recognized its responsibility. I find it stunning in the contrast that Israel murders thousands and thousands, starves more than 1 million people right now, children dying, emaciated, coming to the ruins of hospitals which Israel has destroyed and dying of emaciation and starvation. And here we have an apology for 7 people. But it mostly highlights the shocking double standard that, well, there's an American, these are whites, if I could put it in that ugly way. But that's the ugliness that I see, because the Israelis are not counting Palestinians as human beings suffering in this context. So there's no apology for that. Where's the apology, President Herzog, for the hundreds of thousands of people on the brink of starvation? Right. You don't offer one word of apology. It's outrageous.
This will raise your blood pressure. Here's Admiral Kirby yesterday attempting to answer a question about this. Cut number 1, Chris.
Thanks, Admiral. On the death of those World Central Kitchen aid workers, which includes 1 American who was killed, Netanyahu's reaction was, quote, "It happens in war." What is your reaction to that comment from Netanyahu?
I don't think it'd be useful for me to get into a tit-for-tat here with the Prime Minister of Israel from the podium.
How can you take Netanyahu at his word? As Nancy was saying, this was a deconflicted zone. They had marked their car. They had even coordinated their movements with the IDF.
Yeah, and as I said in my opening statement, obviously, setting aside this incident, because this isn't the first one, there are issues of deconfliction that clearly need to be fleshed out and improved.
So how can the U.S. continue to send aid to Israel without any conditions? Yes, they have a right.
We're not sending aid to Israel. We're sending aid into Gaza, and that's.
Weapons. How can the U.S. continue to send military aid
military
to
assistance
Israel without any conditions? Is there no red line that
can
be crossed?
You know, we've had this discussion, you and me, quite a bit from up here.
These are verbal urgings, verbal commitments. There's no other incentive besides the urging.
I know you want us to hang some sort of condition over their neck, and what I'm telling you is that we continue to work with the Israelis to make sure that they are as precise as they can be, and that more aid's getting in, and we're going to continue to take that approach.
The Admiral took an oath to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution and the laws of the United States. The laws of the United States, he's acting like he doesn't know what they are, absolutely and unequivocally prohibit military aid to any country that is engaged in genocide or obvious acts that are war crimes. And he's saying you don't want us to put any conditions on our aid? He should be fired.
Well, look, he should be fired because he lies every day, aside from everything else. But he should also be fired because he's such a bad actor. You actually see the smirk in almost every answer. It's the same with their guy, Matt Miller at the State Department. These people smirk because they know they're playing a game. This is all about narrative. It's all about spin. It's all about the news cycle. It's nothing about truth. It's nothing about decency. It's nothing about the law. Kirby lies every time he moves his mouth, as the old expression has it. But he smirks along the way, so he's just a lousy actor at the same time. By the way, you can't raise my blood pressure with Kirby anymore because because the man is an absolute disgrace, but he's proved that time and again. So nothing can surprise me about anything that comes out of Kirby's mouth.
Here's one more cut on this. This is News Australia about an Australian aid worker killed as well. Number 3.
A direct hit from a targeted drone strike straight through the charity logo that was meant to ensure those inside were protected from harm. 3 vehicles, 7 aid workers obliterated, among them Australian Zombie Frankham.
Hey, this is Zombie from World Central Kitchen.
The 43-year-old's death now the centre of a new diplomatic war with Israel.
This is completely unacceptable.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese in a 20-minute early morning call with his Israeli counterpart.
I expressed Australia's anger and concern at the death of Zombie Frankham.
The killing summed up in 2 words by Foreign Minister Penny Wong.
Outrageous, and they are unacceptable.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu admits Israeli defense forces were responsible but claims it was unintentional.
This happens in wartime. We are thoroughly looking into it and will do everything to ensure it does not happen again.
Well, it's the same story. Why does it depend on an Australian aid worker dying rather than on the deliberate starvation of 1 million people and the slaughter of 33,000 and rising every day, 70% of whom are women and children? These politicians are fundamentally dishonest and maybe instinctually racist or not, but they count the one life of their citizen as this overwhelming deal that requires an investigation, and they otherwise sit back as a mass genocide takes place before our eyes. So again, the death is tragic. The circumstances are a genocide. And why are we unable to have politicians that understand the most basic, or not understand, that will tell the truth about the most basic facts that are before our eyes?
We're going to take a break. When we come back, we'll discuss with Professor Sachs the latest efforts in Congress to send another $61 billion to Ukraine and what that would mean. That the attack on the Crocus concert hall is a turning point in the conflagration between Ukraine and Russia, given the beliefs of the Russian foreign minister that it is more likely than not that CIA, MI6, and I forget the initials, the Ukrainian intelligence services were involved, given President Putin's stern and serious statements, given the Kremlin's characterization of the conflagration in Ukraine. It's no longer a special military operation. It's now a war.
Well, I think that it was a horrific event, not only as a terrorist attack that took so many lives, but as a direct reminder that there is a lot of engagement of CIA and MI6, as you say, with jihadists, and we're going to learn more about this, no doubt. The Russians have a lot of information, no doubt, and it's also going to come out. The CIA has been running jihadists for more than 40 years, as we've discussed, starting back in Afghanistan and then going through the Balkans, the Caucasus, Ukraine. This is Syria. This has been part of the modus operandi of the CIA, which is to arm jihadists to supposedly do America's business. Of course, the blowback and the disasters have been far more noted, I would say, but this is part of a long story. We don't know all the details here. Will this be a turning point? No, because there was a more fundamental issue, which is that this war is going to continue until there are negotiations between the U.S. and Russia, and the U.S. refuses to negotiate. So there is no turning point. There's just continued bloodshed in Ukraine, continued Ukrainian losses of people and territory, and that will continue because Russia is resisting NATO, and Biden doesn't want to talk about it. Never has been part of this war effort for decades, and the war itself is, of course, 10 years old now, more than 10 years old. It's not something that started a couple of years ago. It started in February 2014 when the U.S. conspired to help violently overthrow the Ukrainian government for the purposes of expanding NATO. So there is no turning point. There's just ongoing war until the United States figures out finally that it has to negotiate. It has to stop telling lies. It has to sit down and talk about mutual security of Ukraine, Russia, and the United States, something that the U.S. has never been willing to do. And I think it's really important to understand that the U.S. continues to drag Ukraine into deeper and deeper disaster. This is Biden's war going back to 2014. It was Obama's and Hillary Clinton's and Victoria Nuland's and Jake Sullivan's and Tony Blinken's war. It came from the push for NATO enlargement. It came from the violent overthrow of a neutral Ukrainian government. And we've been lied to all the time about this war. Judge, I pulled out because I wanted to check the lies. Now we have a new call for another $61 billion. Yeah, let's rip up another $61 billion. Unbelievable, a large amount of money by liars who tell us falsehoods all the time, every day. And one of the things I looked at in the last 24 hours was all the things that were claimed about how our aid was going to lead to the successful Ukrainian counteroffensive. And it's the same people. Ukraine's spring counteroffensive has, quote, very good chance, says Secretary Austin. Ukraine making, quote, steady progress, says top U.S. general. Ukraine likely to succeed, says Defense Secretary. Russia may suddenly break under pressure, says former U.S. General David Petraeus with all his stars on his shoulder. Ukraine's counteroffensive may yet surprise critics. Ukraine offensive is beginning. David Petraeus is optimistic, we're told in the Washington Post. Ukraine's counteroffensive will be, quote, very impressive, says U.S. General Petraeus. You know, these people are liars, and everything they've told us is lies. And Ukraine now has lost hundreds of thousands of people. And because Congress is so pathetic and weak-willed and so much subservient to the campaign contributions of the military-industrial complex and so incapable of honest thought, they're probably going to give another $61 billion the way it's going right now for absolutely nothing.
The Speaker of the House. There's the headline from either yesterday's or today's Times. Johnson, as the Speaker of the House, outlines plan for Ukraine aid. House could act within weeks. What would you say to him, Mike Johnson, if he were right here to try and change his mind to save the American taxpayer from throwing $61 billion into the fireplace, to end the slaughter in Ukraine, to save a generation? President Zelensky today signed legislation lowering the draft age. They're going to go into the graduate schools, the law schools, the medical schools, and the colleges to extract young men, train them for 2 or 3 weeks, put them on the front lines, and they'll be dead.
You know, I would say, Speaker Johnson, you yourself said that the U.S. needs a plan, a strategy, some clarity. So how could you even consider at this point voting $61 billion? And maybe I would give them a little tutorial about $61 billion not being chump change. How could you even consider this when there's obviously no plan, no strategy? Why don't you just tell the truth? And let Biden, by the way, tell the truth. It's his war. He started it. He and Obama and Clinton and others back in 2014. He was there when the U.S. was party to a coup. Okay, get him to explain. Don't just hand over our money, for God's sake, again. And it's not helping Ukraine. It's wasting $61 billion. Again, we could have a little tutorial about why that's not chump change. And then think about what it's going to do for Ukraine. You want to lose Odessa? You want to keep going have Russia keep making its advances because we refuse to talk about anything? That's what I would tell them. What are you doing? You yourself, Mr. Speaker, said we need a strategy and a plan. Now you want to move the vote forward? Give me a break.
Surely the professionals around Biden must understand that this is so far gone, such a lost cause, that 61 billion would succeed in doing nothing except enriching American arms manufacturers. It's not going to change the outcome of the conflagration. It may delay the outcome a little bit. I don't even know if it would do that, because
no, Judge, it's going to do three things only. Yes, it will enrich the arms manufacturers, who will give back some campaign contributions to the congressman who duly voted this against the wishes of the American people. Right. Second, it will cause tens or even hundreds of thousands more Ukrainian deaths. And third, it will cause Ukraine to lose even more territory, because Russia will continue to make gains until we sit down to negotiate. The longer we delay, the more Ukraine loses. So this doesn't delay anything. This doesn't save anything. This is completely for Biden to get to November. But why in the world Johnson would be a party to that is baffling, except that they're all so weak-willed and so corrupted by the campaign contributions that they can't think straight for a day at a time. It's the speaker himself who said we don't have a strategy, we need a strategy.
Right. Well, when the speaker was just Congressman Johnson, he sounded almost not as articulate, not as eloquent like Jeff Sachs. But now that he's Speaker Johnson and he's part of the establishment, he doesn't object when Tony Blinken signs documents under oath certifying that they need to bypass Congress and send equipment to Israel because it's a matter of American national security and it's an emergency. He doesn't object to the extension of a war and the slaughter of innocents and the destruction of more people and the loss of more territory in Ukraine. He's just part of the establishment now that he wants to go. Well, I don't know the man. I never.
Yeah, I don't know him either. Maybe he's just so inexperienced. Maybe he's so corrupted. Maybe another story yesterday is there's a side deal to boost U.S. exports of Louisiana LNG as part of the bargain. Remember, Congress is so corrupt. It's swimming in side deals. We don't hear the truth about any of this right now. And most pathetically, we don't have a president who knows what his job is.
I want to take you back to Israel for a minute. The demonstrations against Prime Minister Netanyahu personally have been enormous and persistent. Is this likely to produce a change in the government? I know, because you've told us, and almost everybody that comes on this show that has a finger on the pulse of Israel has told us, Benny Gantz may be even more aggressive in the way he directs the IDF. But are Bibi Netanyahu's days numbered, Professor Sachs?
Well, of course they're numbered. Everybody hates him. He believes that the war is his safety valve. It sounds so weird, but he thinks that, and he makes the argument explicitly, you don't change leader during a war. So as long as the war continues, he thinks he remains prime minister. The public's disgusted with him, by the way, on all sides, all ideologies. And the fact of the matter is simple. On October 7th, he should have taken responsibility for a massive security failure, and he should have resigned that day.
Professor Sachs, I want you to listen to one more clip before we finish for today. This is former Congressman and running for his old seat again, Dennis Kucinich, a fierce opponent of war, letting Netanyahu have it here on this show. Yes, Bibi pal, you're on your own.
you make me smile, because
yes,
it's going to be great to have Dennis Kucinich back in the Congress. That's for sure.
Yeah, but is it fanciful? in reality to expect that Joe Biden would accept Congressman Kucinich's advice, not before November of 24.
Look, we don't know. Biden, it just may be that he can't function as president right now. We don't really know. My hope and advice to the Democratic Party is give us a different candidate.
Professor Sachs, thank you very much for your time.